What's going on YouTube? Super Insane 18 here, and with the new October Forbidden and Limited ban list being legal in just a couple of days, today we are going to talk about what the top 5 meta decks of the upcoming format are likely going to be. Alright guys, so when making this list, it was definitely hard to kind of come up with a set-in-stone list, and before we get any further, I just want to say that this is my prediction. None of this has actually been tested or proven yet, since the list is not legal for another couple of days at the time of making this video, so this is just what I personally think is going to end up being the top 5 decks based on what we've seen so far. So coming in at number 5, we are going to have Drytron. Now, the biggest reason that I think Drytron is one of the top contending decks, but not necessarily higher than 5th, is because of how powerful cards like Vanity's Ruler and the Magic Key combo are. Being able to very consistently set up a Vanity's Ruler on your side of the field, and pairing it with something like Magic Key Unlocking to be able to play through all of those power spells like Dark Ruler or Forbidden Droplet, definitely make this deck a force to be reckoned with, because when you're allowed to special summon but your opponent is not, you're pretty much the only one allowed to play the game, and Vanity's Ruler being a very big monster, so you can't just like normal summon something and get over it. Unless you're playing something like Fluandres, this is going to hurt a lot of the top tier decks right now, so I think that that alone gives it enough reason to be in the top 5, but not just with Vanity's Rulers. Obviously the consistency was upped with Ben 10 going to 3, not to mention you can play through cards like Artifact Scythe, which for some reason wasn't banned, if people decide to keep playing it, with cards like the Draconid's really big ritual monster that Drytron can play, so this deck doesn't really care about a lot of the other threats and can put up some pretty threatening boards of its own, which I think is enough to give it the spot of 5th on this list. Now, number 4 on our list is going to have to be EXO Sister. I have to admit, this is a deck that I personally don't know a lot about, but I know that it is a force to be reckoned with, if nothing else because of the fact that it can play D-Shifter in the main, and I know a lot of people are crying out for D-Shifter to get banned. I knew that it wasn't because it just got 2 reprints, one being in the Megatins and another being in the new Crystal Beast structure deck, so I knew that this card wasn't going to go anywhere anytime soon, and the ability to just play through it and not care, while all of the other decks are very, very hurt by it, gives EXO Sister an edge that not a lot of other decks can really use, and not to mention the ability to just kind of recur resources what feels like almost infinitely because of the tag out mechanic. You can just sit there and be able to resummon your XYZs by using your big boss monster, and all of your XYZs are going to get effects that do other things like effect negation and whatnot, so this has a lot of playability on your opponent's turn as well. With the new support that just came out in the last set, Power of the Elements, I believe it was Martha and Returnia are the 2 big ones. I don't really, like I said, I don't know too much about this deck to give you much of an in-depth insight, but from what I've seen and the couple of times I've played against this deck, I have to respect it. It did win a YCS recently as well, so that just proves how powerful it is, that even before the ban list, when, you know, certain other decks took minor hits. I mean, we're all not happy about this ban list, let's be honest, but with certain decks taking minor hits and this was able to still win before those hits, it shows how strong this deck is, so I think that it has well deserved the spot of number 4. Now, number 3 on our list is something I wish I could put higher, and if you know me by now, you already know what deck this is. That is going to be Fluandres. Now, Fluandres gets a lot of hate because of the D-Shifter and the Barrier Statue, and just how absolutely dumb it is that when you're locked under the Barrier Statue, I have ways to get rid of your normal summon that are really easy to do so it's kind of a little bit unfair, and I know that a lot of people wanted the Barrier Statue to go as well, but unfortunately it is what it is. Thankfully for me though, because I love this deck and I think that it is just a little bit better than EXO Sister. I feel like it has much more power plays because not only do we have the D-Shifter like EXO Sister has, but again we have that Barrier Statue, and with cards like Magnificent Map, which when you normal, I normal, or with the trap card Dreaming Town, which I can just activate to normal at any point anyway, I can use cards like Ryza to spin your normal summon, or if I want to set up something like an Apex Avion, I can go ahead and use the trap to banish it from the grave to Book of Moon your normal summon, and then you're pretty much just going to continue to be locked under the Barrier Statue as well, not to mention again the D-Shifter. Plus, Empen is really, really strong against certain decks like Sprite, because you will not be able to use your Elf, which is a key part of the combo, because if I set up the Empen, you cannot use the effects of attack position special summon monsters, and in case you didn't know, Links can't be in defense, they have to be in attack, so that does kind of turn off any deck that does rely on links, so I definitely think it is a very strong contender. Unfortunately, there are outs, obviously. If you've watched my recent Sprite profile, you know that one of the outs I play for Empen is the Onibimaru Soul Sweeper, because you can summon it in defense and banish the Empen, which is why this deck isn't higher on the list in my opinion, because even though it is very annoying to have to go against and very hard to play around in certain scenarios, it does have its outs, and those outs are just a little bit too common to make it much better than third. So I think that Fluandres is definitely a really good deck moving forward. It has a really good matchup against the top two, so yeah, it's got to take the place of third in my book. Now, moving on to number 2, I'm pretty sure you guys can guess what it is, but if you haven't, it is going to be Sprite. Now, Sprite did take a bit of an indirect hit with the banning of Ronin Totem, but again, if you've seen my recent videos, you've known that I've already taken and tested a no Ronin list, and went undefeated at my locals. There was, I think, almost 40 players. We usually tend to get pretty good locals, so it's a decently sized testing ground. Obviously, we still have to test it moving forward, but I don't think it's contested that Sprite is going to be the second best deck of the format, because there are multiple ways that you can play it. I'm going to show you actually 2. The one that you're seeing right now is the one that I went undefeated with. If you've seen the deck profile, you already know this list, but I think that it's really good because you are still able to make the Totally Awesome relatively easily, not to mention locking your opponent out with the Ibly. The only thing that I said in the deck profile that I might change is I do feel like I want to add Dupe Frog. Now, Dupe Frog is going to be so that they can't just crash the Ibly into something, because if I summon the Dupe Frog in defense, then the Ibly has to attack the dupe, and it can't die by attacking a defense position monster, which keeps them locked out indefinitely, which I think is really strong. A lot of people say don't play dupe because of super poly, but I think I'm okay with getting super polyed. If you super poly my toad and my dupe, I just got rid of 2 of your cards, being the super poly and the discard. Then you have a monster, so I can just use the elf to reborn the toad, and then the toad is going to get rid of a 3rd card, so now toad just got rid of 2 cards instead of, or 3 cards instead of 2, so I think I'm okay with it, but a lot of people are still afraid of super poly, but I think it's worth it for the potential of making them locked out, because I don't think I would summon the dupe unless I have the ability to give you the Ibly, but that's just me. It's just something to consider. But the other version that I want to show you guys is going to be a version that just abandons the frogs altogether, which I know some people are considering doing with the fact that Ronin got banned, and this is going to abuse Capshell, because Capshell is actually really cool when you think about it. It is a level 2, so you can just normal it and use it as your extender. If you are using the adventure variant, you don't use its normal summon effect, so you're able to just normal summon it without really losing out on much, but when you use it for a card like Sprite Elf, you get to draw a card. Unfortunately, you won't draw a card if you use it to overlay for Gigantic, because you have to use the effect to activate an effect, which means you essentially have to detach it as cost. Since Gigantic doesn't detach as cost, you won't get the draw off that, but you will get the draw off any of the other XYZs you make, which brings us into the next card that is in this list that is the replacement for Totally Awesome, and that is Djinn Buster. Djinn Buster is a effect negation, so what you can do is you can make the elf draw a card, use the elf reborn the Capshell, overlay the Capshell and something else into the Djinn Buster, and then when you detach to use the Djinn Buster negate, you detach the Capshell and the Capshell will get another draw. So it's just a little bit of a consistency pusher, but also a level 2 that works with the deck. If you don't want to use something like that, like let's say you're not playing the adventure cards, you could play something like Aperia, which is something that can also just draw on normal summon, so really just kind of adding in more consistency cards, which I think is important since we lost the recursion in Ronin. If you want to abandon the frogs, you have to have more consistency, so that is enough to keep Sprite very well and alive in this game, and I think that there's really not much else that can contend with this, obviously other than the number 1 deck, but that places Sprite firmly in our 2nd slot. Now, before we get into our number 1 slot, there are 3 honorable mentions that I would like to put on this list, and I'm just going to list all 3 at once because I don't really have builds for them just yet, but that is going to be Spellbook Dogmatica, Branded Despia, and Sword Soul. These are all decks that either got boosted by the list or just didn't get touched at all and were previously top contenders. So I think that given the right pilot and the right build, these 3 decks still have a very good chance of putting in work in today's meta. I just think that everything else on the list is slightly better, so take that with a grain of salt, do with it what you will. I know that there are some pilots that no matter what they're playing, they can just play a deck that isn't necessarily the best at a best competitive level. So if you're one of those people and you are behind these decks, decks. Don't feel discouraged that it's not on these lists. This is just something that I am, again, predicting based on what we've seen. Obviously, we know that Sword Soul and Branded Despia are good decks, but I think with the unbanning of Spellbook of Judgment, that Dogmatica spellbook can be a threat to be considered, just because you can sit on a Jowgen and be able to protect it. Plus, you have your Dogmatica stuff, so you've got stuff like Punishment to get rid of your normal summon, you've got stuff like Fleur de Lis to negate effects, you've got stuff like Maximus, which can let you set up a Winda if they out your Jowgen. So again, just honorable mention, something I wanted to throw in there. Let's go ahead and get into the first best deck. Obviously, it's Tearlament, and if you guys didn't know that, you've been living under a rock. This is something that was very, very not well received with the ban list. The fact that really they didn't hit the deck at all. A lot of people wanted it to get hit. I was under the impression that both Sprite and Tearlament were safe because they were too new and Konami would want to continue selling the sets that they are a part of, but they did still get some indirect hits the same as Sprite. Unfortunately, they weren't as impactful as the Sprite indirect hit. They did lose the Fairy Tale Snow and the Chaos Ruler. Personally, I was a fan of the Punk Danger Tearlaments, and Chaos Ruler was a hit to the Punk variant because now you can't just mill cards and set up a Baron for free. Obviously, it lost Hulk, which is a big no-no for the Punks as well, because you would no longer be able to summon the Shinobi Necro and use that in tandem with the Chaos Ruler to make that free Baron. And obviously, you can no longer send the Fairy Tale Snow off of something like Curious or just flat out milling it, but I still think that not only is this deck the best deck at the moment, but I believe it's November, early November, we're getting the Magnificent Maven set with the Ishizu cards, and if you don't know, that might actually shape up to be a Tier 0 format. A lot of people were saying that Sprites were going to be a Tier 0 format. I never really got behind that because I didn't think that they were just uncontested the best deck, but once we get that new support, I do think Tearlament is going to be the uncontested best deck, so make sure you guys are ready for that. That is why the Tearlament cards are seeing an uptick in price, not just from the ban list, but from the fact that we are getting a whole other archetype that pairs well with it, and I just think it's going to be absolutely insane. So Tearlament is without doubt the #1 on this list. If you didn't expect that, I don't know where you've been. Like I said, it's pretty obvious. This deck is just absolutely crazy, especially if the right pilot is behind it. You can set up full boards on turn 0 if your opponent goes first with cards like Havness, and it's just absolutely insane. Not to mention, in Darkwing Blast, we are getting the Bisteds. I believe they were just revealed to be renamed as Bestial, which you can also use on turn 0 if your opponent goes first. So I think it's absolutely nuts, but there you guys have it. That is going to be my top 5 meta decks for the upcoming October 2022 format. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it and learned something. If you did, you know the deal. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, like, comment, share with your friends, maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. Don't forget to check out our merch store, link in the description as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.